Yes, Ruth? Okay. Can you go out to the quickest way, Ruth, if we go out to zoom.us? And at the top, it'll say join a meeting. I think you can just do zoom.us and you don't have to be a member or anything like that and just join a meeting. And no, that's okay. No, that's all right. That's, okay. Meeting ID is 960.
Got it. I see you. Yeah.
Yep. I can let you go. Right? Are you in? Okay, bye.
Thanks.
Annette, do you have everybody in that you are waiting for? Corey, Tim, Aaron. You on mute?
Yep, I can hear you. This
Good.
is Aaron.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi.
Everybody except Vince. Is Vince joining us, Corey?
He should be joining us.
Okay.
So,
Tim?
Ellen's in there. So for those of you that maybe were not on yet, Marty just gave us a quick, awesome tip that you can mute yourself. And then when you need to talk, you can hit your space bar and talk and then hit it again and it'll put it right back on mute. Oh, hold it down while you're talking. If that's any easier than going back and forth. But if you want to respond quickly, just hold your space bar down and talk while you're, have it held down and then release it. Look good, Marty? Where's Nancy? Yeah, that'd be awesome. And then just look in there and see if there's any in there. Thanks, Leslie.
How are you doing, Joe? We about ready?
Almost ready, Carl. And I know. What's Vince's last name? Vince, can I give you a name for the screen besides just your iPhone?
Sure, Vince Caristo.
Can you spell that for me? Caristo?
Caristo.
Thank you. Okay. And so, this one. And then to get that on the side again, what do I do? Just hit, oh, down below. That's not what I want though. Okay. So, but they see, they're just seeing the full screen. They don't see the. Okay. All my stuff is, right. Okay. So you select that I just go full screen then, probably. I think I'm ready to go. Looks like everybody is in the meeting. So Carl, we just pulled in the public comment box. We just pulled in the public comment box from outside of 140 West Pine and there were no comments.
Okay, so we should begin.
I'm getting a little bit of feedback from Carl, maybe back away a little bit from the microphone. Thanks, Carl.
Is that better?
A little bit better, yeah.
Okay. All right, well, let's begin. Welcome to the Missoula Redevelopment Agency meeting. All of the members of the board and staff and expected guests are attending from a remote location. We're holding this meeting virtually, so we need to do public comments a little different than usual, and that will be done via a live call-in phone line. Jill, have you shared with the public the information on how to access that line?
One moment, Carl, I'll pull that up. I'll pull the public comment info up.
Okay, yeah, now that'll show in a minute. For anybody who's commenting, when you call in, you'll be placed in a virtual waiting room until it's your turn to comment. We'll take calls in the order in which they were received. And please be sure to mute. Oh, there we are.
How long do I leave it up there, Marty? How long do you usually leave this up? You should probably leave out a couple of numbers in case there's.
Okay, Joe, please, if the public, please be sure to mute your TV or computer when you call so there'll be no echo. So let's get started with the regular board meeting of the Missoula Redevelopment Agency. It's Thursday, May 21st, 2012. We're holding the meeting virtually over Zoom. It's a few minutes after 12. I think I can make a record based upon the screen that we have that Vice Chairman Nancy Moe is present, members Ruth Reineking, Melanie Brack, and Tasha Jones are all present. And I'm Carl, I'm the chair, and I'm present. With that,
on the left-hand side.
we can move to the first item on our agenda, which are the minutes of April 16th, 2020 regular board meeting. Do any board members have any additions or corrections to the minutes?
On YouTube, it will only show their picture.
If not, is there a motion from someone to approve the minutes?
I move approval of the minutes as submitted.
Okay, Nancy's moved. Is someone second?
I'll second. This is Ruth.
Ruth is seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None. The minutes have been approved. Okay, next we have public comments or announcements. This will be on matters that aren't in the action item agenda. We'll take public comment and on items in the action item agenda when we get to that item and when we have actually a motion on the floor, something for people to comment on. I'm killing time here because it takes a few seconds for people who want to make public comments to call in, so we'll give them that time. In the meantime, if any board members have any, or any of the staff who are present have any comments or announcements, now would be the time to make them.
Then I have to go out.
Yeah,
Joe, how much longer should we wait?
You're muted.
Carl, there is nobody in the waiting room at this time.
Okay. Waited a sufficient amount of time, you think?
Pardon me?
Have we waited a sufficient amount of time?
I think you've waited a sufficient amount of time for the delay. Yes.
So let's go to action items. First one is Berks Corridor Transit Oriented Development Infrastructure Study. Annette, you're leading the discussion on this, correct?
I am, yes. So a couple months ago, I think maybe it was at the February meeting, staff requested authorization from the board to extend HDR's contract to go into a second phase of, to continue or going into a second phase of the Brooks Corridor TOD study. And the board gave us authorization to enter into negotiations. And so staff will be asking for authorization for a fee to get started on that. But before we do, felt that it was really, this is a great opportunity to present the study. The study was completed in December of 2019. And we've been in the process of doing some editing and formatting. And then of course, COVID-19 came along and derailed a lot of stuff. I think we're sort of back on track now. So our intent today is to give a presentation. It's not going to be a really in-depth presentation because this is a pretty meaty subject, but we did submit a handout. I can see that Nancy is looking through that, which is wonderful. A handout that sort of, yes, Carl has it as well. Great. That sort of hits the highlights. This presentation will just give you a little bit more of the meat, and then we will make the entire study available electronically, certainly on the city website and maybe on websites of some of the participating groups. So I'm just going to jump into it. I'm going to do introduction and sort of set up the scene, and then I'm going to hand off to Tim Erickson, who's with, he's our project manager from HDR. And he can talk through some of the sort of the nuts and bolts of how we arrived at what we agreed as the preferred solution is. And Erin Wilson from the city's transportation planning department, and then Corey Aldridge and Vince Caristo from Mountain Line are with us as well. All integral partners with the Midtown Mojo group that's been sort of shepherding this process. So I'll just, with that, just jump into this presentation. I hope this works. share. Ta-da. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not seeing any.
Yes.
Okay, so as you likely are aware, back in, it was before I moved to Missoula, so I think it was in 2015, a group of folks who are really interested in making a transformation on the Brooks Corridor coalesced and attended a planning forum that was put together by New Mobility West. And out of that grew this vision for some sort of a transformational, transforming something transformational on the Brook Street corridor and incorporating transit and transit-oriented development. Mountain Line for quite some time now has been very interested in getting a 15-minute headway bus on Brooks Corridor. And that it sounds simple, but in order to make that work, you have to be able to get people safely on and off the bus, and then safely across the street so that they can get to where they're going. And you also need a critical mass of population, either working or living, or ideally both, in the location using the bus to make it successful. So that was the vision that was formed in 2015. That group got funding from New Mobility West to do an initial study that was Puma came to town in 2016. I was on staff by then and did like a 30,000 foot, maybe a 60,000 foot level public engagement study to start getting some vision for how this TOD might manifest itself. And so then following that, we sort of had this vision, started to we needed to put some meat on the bones. And so I just went through this, just want to make the point that this study, this TOD infrastructure study, is a follow-on to a number of planning efforts in Midtown that started back in 2003 and citywide as well, that are looking at transit, making the city, or encouraging walkability, cycling, multimodal transportation in the city, I guess, and compact and transit-oriented development. So I just wanted to set the scene with that. This TOD study that we're presenting today, funding was provided through a whole coalition of groups. MRA has funding, and Mountain Line, the city's development services, so the transportation department and land use planning department, the county provided funding, and the Midtown Association provided funding. And collectively, there's a group, and I think you're all aware of this, there's a group that we've referred to ourselves as the Midtown Mojo Group, that is a collection of city, county, Midtown Association, Mountain Line, MDT, a whole collection of folks who have, we've probably numbered up to maybe 15 people at any given time. So it's a broad coalition of groups and folks who are participating in this vision and all working together and all working together on this. So the study area is, and this was established in the 2016 Brooks Corridor Study, extends for approximately 2 miles between Reserve Street to essentially the southwest, and Mount on the north. And loosely, the Brooks in 2016, the Brooks Corridor Study extended approximately a 1/4 mile to either side of the Brook Street corridor. This study primarily focuses just on the Brook Street corridor, but takes a look to a 1/4 mile on either side with regard to things like bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. And are there opportunities perhaps to close some streets, to consolidate curb cuts, to simplify some of the issues, especially traffic issues that are occurring on the corridor. And if you, another graphic further on in the presentation will show the 2016 study established 4 general nodes in the Midtown area for to really focus development. So one sort of around the McDonald intersection, certainly around the mall. There was one a little further up, sort of at the Brooks South Russell intersection, and then a 4th node sort of at the northern end of the corridor. And so this study respects those nodes, but really is reinforcing that Brooks Street is the spine of this entire area. And so really focusing on how to reinforce it as a spine, but also how to make it very porous so that it's not the great divide of Midtown that it is right now. So with that, Tim, maybe I will turn it over to you just a little bit to talk about how HDR approached some of the existing conditions and some of the things that you found. And then we can just kind of proceed from there.
Yeah, sure. Everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the good introduction there, Annette. So, the basis of starting with the existing conditions is, again, building on a lot of the studies that have already been completed, and then looking at publicly available information such as cadastral and other things, especially from a right-of-way perspective, as the right-of-way constraints change throughout the corridor from Reserve up to Mount. Looked at the, taking a few steps further on the previously completed studies, from a land use perspective and development opportunities. So we worked through a few of those tasks and additional information to expand upon those as well. Also had a few of our folks that have both from a kind of a planning level study expertise area, but also from a transit expertise area, walk the corridor, look at pictures, try to be present when pedestrian, to physically watch how pedestrians are interacting within the corridor, how vehicles are interacting within the corridor, look at how approaches are functioning, both from an ingress and egress perspective, some of those things. And then leveraging that to really put together as much of the data as we can to bring forth to the working group as we started developing the plan. I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is where we worked on some of the opportunities for improvements of transforming this corridor. And we came up with 5 principal factors on operational and safety deficiencies within the corridor. So you can read those, but just real quick: long crossing distances, especially for pedestrians, increasing the potential for vehicular conflicts. Existing corridor layout is not necessarily conducive to multimodal and walkable vision that the community does have. Part of that is how it is classified as a road as well. So one thing that you'll hear as this goes on and moving forward to on the agenda item for the next steps would be the coordination with MDT, because this road is owned and maintained by the Montana Department of Transportation. So that's definitely in the mix of these different factors. Overall difficulty in crossing discourages the different businesses and employers from expanding. So some of that feedback is coming directly to Annette and others within MRA, and also with our team, and looking through the different development opportunities, and obviously working through parking to accessibility, multimodal connectivity, having those nodes of users be able to get transit to these businesses, be able to get bikes and peds to more of these businesses as well. Numerous uncontrolled driveways and wide curb cuts, which create safety concerns, also create opportunities for turning and some additional vehicular conflicts. And then queuing lanes, especially in the left turns at the intersections, and then making sure that we look at that with transit operations and not reducing the overall, what's called the level of service, or how traffic flows throughout intersections and throughout the corridor itself as well. Go to the next slide on that. So overall, with the existing conditions assessment, heavy traffic volumes, numerous driveways, high crash rates, and the lack of pedestrian bicycle accommodations really is what set that foundation of coming up with what we're now saying is transforming the Brooks Street corridor.
And I think it's important to note, I think that this was, to me, this was a really critical phrase that came through in the report. It's not functioning, we may think it functions fine, but it really has so much more potential, and it's really not functioning up to its community resource potential. And I think that I mean, we all know that, but that was, I think, something really important to reinforce.
So as we move forward from just identifying the existing conditions and constraints, that allowed our team to work and develop overall project goals and objectives. So I think a really key one is the graphic on the lower left of the screen. That takes into incorporation the land use developments, the transportation improvements, and that's for all users within the corridor, as well as the streetscape and landscape investments. So it's a place, making those placemaking opportunities. It's a place that people want to be. It's a place that people want to, future developments want to occur, and all of that fed into the overall corridor vitality for Brook Street. So off on the right-hand side, next to those graphics, describe some of the project goals. So making the most effective use of existing right-of-way. Obviously mentioned the right-of-way constraints already, and there's definitely going to be a further analysis needed to get a detailed account of potential right-of-way impacts. But the goal would be to make as much improvements within the existing right-of-way as possible. Define access improvements to enhance safety, while also maintaining or improving overall visibility and accessibility to businesses. Providing a safe and more pedestrian frequent crossings on Brook Street. So being able to, again, provide those opportunities for the multimodal users, the non-motorized users within the corridor, that can encourage that use within the corridor there. Creating a corridor identity through the placemaking. Again, that's with the streetscapes and the landscapes. And then one of the first things Annette mentioned was the 15-minute headways and what Mountain Line is envisioning for the corridor. So improving the overall transit service within the corridor and the connectivity and the accessibility to transit within the corridor, and provide a balanced, healthy business and residential climate today and in the future through mixed uses and creation of primary nodes along the corridor. So we looked at various nodes that were identified in previous studies for a land use perspective and how that can work with future business opportunities. So this slide's a little bit difficult to read, at least on the screen. So many of you that have printed it off or have it on your computer, you can zoom in. But this does just go into more detail of some of the issues that have already been mentioned. So connectivity, the main categories are up on the top part of the screen. connectivity, development nodes, safety and access management, aesthetics, and visual relief. So we identified overall issues in more detail and then focused on actions within this plan that this transformation of the Brook Street corridor, the outcomes of the transformation can have. Annette, do you feel like we need to go into any detail on any of those?
I don't think so. I think that and certainly this, most of this information came right out of the report. And so when you have the full report in front of you, you can spend more time really sifting through it. But I think the important thing is what Tim just touched on, that the sort of the four big issues that it synthesizes down to is that we need to address connectivity, we need to address development at those established or identified development nodes. We need to address safety and access management, and then in order to make this a place not just functional, but a place where people want to be and want to spend the time, really take a look at the aesthetics and the visual relief. So the streetscape and the placemaking of the street.
So in the next few slides, we'll get into kind of how we started looking at alternatives and what options are available for transforming the corridor. And that started with the basis of our design concepts. Again, pretty much summary of things that have already been mentioning, understanding what, extensive field reviews, understanding what current constraints are, overall baseline conditions of the road, the intersections. We did some baseline traffic studies, gathered as much information as we could from the previous studies as well. Overall input from stakeholders and local governing entities. Again, a lot of that was developed directly with Annette and others at MRA, and the feedback that they're having from the working group in particular. And then overall, the last bullet, consideration of modal and configuration options with regard to fit or applicability to the Brooks corridor. So again, back to what are the existing constraints and what can fit for the most part within that to meet the vision, as well as accommodate some of those issues that were brought up in there as well. So through the evaluation of our various design concept alternatives, ability to promote multimodalism, capacity to guide future growth and development of the corridor, placemaking potential, existing right-of-way and transportation technology. I think that's an important one to remember there. We use the term, I believe, future-proofing the corridor. So understanding what technologies we know of, but also knowing that technologies change, and how does that play a role in the future of transit-oriented design and also the bike ped and also for the vehicles. Can't forget about the vehicles using the corridor as well. And so then the overall potential to be transformational.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, go ahead. Thank you. So overall, we came down to 4 design concepts to be evaluated. And in reality, it was 3 design concepts, and the 4th kind of morphed from the initial 3. So the design concepts 1, design concept 2, and design concept 3 were the initial ones that were developed. And what these are, and we can get into, I believe the graphics on the next slide get into them a little bit more. The overall design concept 1, we looked at and then ranked those based on the criteria, goals, and objectives that are shown off to the left-hand side. So it's the constrained right-of-way concept. And I'm just gonna pull up the overall report separate on my screen that you can't see. Again, you can read about this more later, but the overall design concept 1, we looked at infrastructure design concepts focused on the improvements to mainly the intersections within the corridor limits, so within the reserve to mount corridor limits, providing bicycle and pedestrian facilities and amenities. And in this case, the overall transit would actually stay within the existing travel lane. So this was focused a lot more on bus stops that would be off on the side of the road, on either side of the road, and then looking at signalized improvements, access improvements to improve the safety of the corridor for for all users, as well as maintaining the vehicular traffic on the corridor. The second design concept, which we're terming the full corridor BRT. BRT stands for Bus Rapid Transit. This is looking at having actually a center running BRT right down the middle of the corridor. Think of where raised medians generally would be, right in the center of the roadway, having buses run on dedicated 15-minute headways, and they have a dedicated actually travel lane within there. And so this was actually looked at finding opportunities to place very specific transfer stations, and some of the advantages that come from this design concept, and one of the reasons for a center running BRT lane, is that it reduces your pedestrian path for the pedestrians that want to get to the transfer stations in half. So instead of crossing the entire street of Brooks, as an example, you're crossing half of it to get to the center, to where these transfer stations are, where the buses are, to be able to pick them up. And then based on dispatching, you can actually time the buses, so it doesn't have to be 2 lanes wide. It's actually only a single lane wide, and buses have certain priorities based on their timing and their headways to maintain those, and they can meet and pass each other at the transfer station areas. So again, this was from mainly looking at BRT in a center running lane, all the way from Reserve up to Stevens. And the main reason it didn't go up to Mount is the constrained right-of-way that is north of Stevens. So then looking at road diet or other opportunities on the northern part of the project with this concept. And then the third concept was mainly due to the right-of-way requirements of overall design concept 2. And this third concept reduced the length of the center running BRT to only the southern portion of the corridor. So that was approximately between Paxson and Door Lane. So it was a very short area that was focused on, and that just spun out of just purely the overall impacts and other things. But as we move forward and as we analyze these based on the goals and objectives, found that that was not providing the overall transformation of the corridor that was the main goal and objective of the study. And so we that was one of the first ones that probably wasn't carried forward too much further. What ended up becoming the preferred design concept, which is it's actually kind of a mix between design concept 1 and design concept 2 to an extent. We focused a lot on intersection improvements while also being able to incorporate a center running BRT lane. One primary difference between this concept and concept number 2, and you might be able to see it on the graphic that's on the screen, is on the southern end, it actually ends at Door Lane. With the center running BRT would end at Door Lane. And this was through collaboration with Mountain Line, and looking at this of being able to, obviously there's need for accessibility to Walmart and other locations there that if you can continue to reserve, could actually cause some complications of trying to get from a center running BRT through Reserve, making the turns either on Reserve or down further to other areas that transit wants to serve. And so actually found that terminating the center running BRT at Door Lane provided some enhanced opportunities for basically transitioning in and out of that center running BRT. So again, this was the fourth concept, if you will, but it morphed from the development of the first 3, took kind of the best components of the various pieces and moved those forward. So this in particular, there are 3 circles. They're hard to see, but they are BRT stations, so transfer stations. And they're not located, again, this is a conceptual level, so those are not to be interpreted as that is the only location they can go or that's the exact location they can go, but they seem to make the most sense, at least at this level of the planning study. Looked at other opportunities for bike ped connectivity. Those are shown with the green lines and bikes, looking at those future connectivities and working with the city county planning there as well for that. Improvements to left turn bays, in particular the storage length, to be able to improve queuing. That was one of the things that was mentioned as an existing constraint within the corridor. But then also some of the intersections would have some modifications to either removing left turns or looking at opportunities to not allow U-turns. Some of those that definitely still, all those details still need to be worked out. Again, it was a very high level planning analysis, but we did look at intersection functionality from a traffic, bike ped perspective and what impacts the center running BRT could have with that.
And I just wanted to maybe interject before we dive into the center running, this preferred concept. We've got some more detailed sections and perspectives that help convey the concept, but wanted to just step back a little bit to how we arrived at this concept. So as Tim referred to the design concepts that there were 3, and we landed on this, which is the preferred concept, and they kind of morph a little bit into each other. When this study started, we initially thought that we need to keep our focus within the right-of-way lines. And as you're aware, Brooks has pretty ample right-of-way south, I guess it's south of Paxson. But north of Paxson, it gets really constrained. And we today barely have room for adequate sidewalks. So that's where we started, was saying that's sacrosanct. We have to stay between the lines. And we began to realize that maybe we had the blinders on too tight. And so said to the designers, take those blinders off, take those limitations off, and think broadly about what might be most transformational and what's the right thing to do long-term for this corridor. And that's then we were able to start getting these maybe a little bit more creative and more sort of transformational ideas. And I think that it feels that the center running concept, it solves a lot of problems, including traffic flow problems that exist on the corridor today. And so pedestrian crossings, traffic flow gets us a 15-minute bus, but there will be some right-of-way impacts. We don't know where exactly, we don't know how much exactly, but we know that there will be some right-of-way impacts.
Okay, great. So on the screen here is a typical section. So this would be if you're standing right in the middle of the road and looking kind of down the road, if you will. And these are graphical representations of what this the intent of the center running BRT preferred concept that came up with could look like. And there is a little location key map kind of on the upper right portion of the screen to identify that mainly this is the typical section as it could look, mainly between intersections where you don't have turn lanes and some of those things. So again, maintaining 2 lanes of traffic in each direction. The center running bus, it does have both directions of arrows, as you can see. It is a single lane width of wide, and it relies on the overall dispatch and operations of the transit service to be able to accommodate that. And then looking at the non-motorized usage on the outside and enhancing those as well. So we've talked through a lot of different options, whether it's cycle tracks, multi-use paths, separated path from a sidewalk, and some of those features that still need to be fully vetted. But I think the team overall has a great vision for what is transformational and also accommodates future needs. So an example of how it accommodates future needs is if you only wanted to install a sidewalk and accommodate the right-of-way based on that, then in the future, if there's a substantial uptick in the non-motorized users or wanting to look at opportunities to have a cycle track or multi-use path, then there wasn't enough right of way or enough available space planned for from the beginning to accommodate that. So we wanted to take this to a grand vision, again, transforming the overall corridor into that. And you can see that with these typical sections. And so this is a typical section that you would see at one of the overall BRT stations, transfer stations. As you can see, a bus in each direction. This does allow for pedestrians, again, to cross only half of the street at a time to get to that station, and they would wait at a basically a raised median type of platform, wait for those buses that would be on 15-minute headways in either direction, and load those buses accordingly. So this would be an example of what it would look like at an intersection. So you'd have a raised median that would separate traffic again, and you have bus traffic in their own dedicated lane in the center. But the main difference here would be that the left turn lane of the vehicles that look like they're driving away into the screen with that orangish vehicle there. And again, with the accommodating the features for the non-motorized traffic on the outsides. And then this is looking at north of Stevens, as Annette alluded to, with the constrained right-of-way. So finding opportunities for potentially a road diet type of scenario where you can actually enhance your overall use for all users of the corridor, where you'd have your enhanced use of the non-motorized users, have some abilities for boulevard and parking, which is the placemaking and landscaping, at the same time accommodating the vehicular use. So continue the transformation of that. In this case, this would not have the center running BRT, dedicated BRT from this section of the project limits.
So the bus, and the reason, well, one of the reasons, the bus would turn up Stevens and then continue a route that Mountain Line currently has in place.
So the next few slides are really exciting. There's also a handout, an 11 by 17 handout that can be printed front and back and kind of folded like a little booklet. We intended to have that as showing the highlights. We took these renderings. These are very dedicated renderings specific to this project. Creating these renderings to help visualize more from a overall transformational perspective of what opportunities exist within the corridor. And so this is what our team, graphic designers and feedback from the overall working group and things came up with for what this transformation of Brooks could look like. So in this particular case, you see an intersection that has the center running BRT again. It has a transfer station right in the center, and then obviously future growth and development that would infill in along the entire corridor and feed that placemaking ability throughout the corridor.
And I just want to add that these buildings are, they're not, we have no vision for what architecturally the buildings would look like, just that there's some sense of density and some sense of massing. And that vision was established with the 2016 Brooks corridor study. So these buildings look a little generic, and that's intentional.
So probably not a lot more to narrate with these next few, but just a few seconds on each one of these next few slides, just really help portray the vision that the group came up with as we developed the overall plan that, as Annette alluded to, was finalized towards the end of last year.
Nancy, you have a question? Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little difficulty with this concept it appears from the drawings that the buses are going in the opposite direction of the traffic for the side of the street that they're on. Is that right? If you go back. Right here. So these cars are coming in this direction, but the bus is going in the opposite direction.
Mhm. So in that particular case, we can talk about that in more details. And I'm not a transit planner myself, so apologize if I don't have the exact answer. But more importantly here is that this shows that it's probably aligned specifically for how a station would want to transfer its users. More importantly, but I just based on how these stations get placed. And this is the only place that has them on either side. I think that we could work that out, and yeah, quite frankly, it could be even something that accidentally got flipped just in the rendering itself. But
actually, I can interject on that one. Nancy, it is confusing, but it is intentional, and I think a really creative way to use this space. The bus, so there's a center lane down the middle of the corridor, and it's approximately 15 feet wide for so one bus. And so it's designed so that buses can go in multi-directional. But at the transfer stations or the bus stops, the buses need, in order for Mountain Line to be able to use the buses that they currently have in stock, say if a bus were driving north on Brooks and come to this intersection and the transfer station is right here, instead of continuing in their flow of traffic, they would go contraflow just at the station so that passengers could get off and get on using the bus that's in the existing fleet. Once they go past the station, they would get back in the single track and continue north. And then a bus coming south would do the opposite. So that's the intent, so that it doesn't have to be a double lane for buses in the middle of the street.
Well, I'm sure that's something that you'll work out. It sounds like it adds confusion to the traffic flow to me. But I have another question, and that has to do with reserve to Dory Lane. And I understand this map and what is trying to do with that. But is there a transition from coming, I guess you'd be coming north on Brooks from Reserve to Dory? Is there a transition necessary there? I mean, all of a sudden we have a center lane BRT.
Yep, that's a really good question. So there is a transition. There's a few different options, and really we tried to address it just more in the text, I believe, in our study, that the transitions are required in the locations across the United States that have center running BRT. We can provide some pictures and things there, but as far as the transition, yes. So you actually work it into a dedicated phase in the signal itself that allows buses to get in and out of that center running at those specific locations, and also on the north end as well. So not just here, and that you set up the signals appropriately with that to be able to accommodate the in and out, while at the same time having minimal impact to the vehicular traffic and not causing any additional confusion or issues for also the non-motorized users, and not increasing the overall conflict opportunities there.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify for me, are we being asked to agree with this concept so that HDR can go forward based on this concept to accomplish what is stated in the motion, the two, engaging the MDT and determining right of way needs and impacts? are we being asked to agree with the concept, the preferred concept?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl.
Any other, or Annette, are you guys done? Any
Um,
other questions?
I'm done, thank you.
What about, any other questions from any other board members?
Yes. Not so much questions as maybe some emphasis on a couple of those points that have already been made. Because you mentioned back on the, you had a slide early on about the existing conditions assessment, and number 3 mentioned the difficulty in crossing that discourages both businesses and employers from expanding to take advantage of opportunities on the other side of the street. And I think that it's good to keep in mind that that Puma studies identified that there are 2,000 businesses along the Brook Street corridor that employ 17,000 people. Those are a lot of people that could utilize the bus system if it's running consistently down, whether it's down the middle or on the lanes, but if it's consistently 15-minute bus service on Brooks itself, that's a lot of people that could utilize that. And in that area, there's also a population of 16,000 people for which Brooks is a definite corridor for accessing the other side of the street. It's a barrier. And I think that there's the safety aspects of being able to breach that barrier is worth emphasizing. The opportunities for economic development then with the permanence of the bus and just knowing that Missoula is going to continue to grow, the economic opportunities there are really quite great, and I think that needs to be emphasized as well. What didn't get mentioned in terms of the function of Brook Street, when we think about how it functions now and we say, well, it is functioning, studies have shown that 20 years from now, it's going to be maxed out, and the time to address that is now, not 20 years from now. So I'm very much supportive of this, and thank you for the presentation.
So Carl, this is Ellen.
Yes, Ellen.
I've forgotten how to raise my hand in the Zoom. I'd like to elaborate a little bit more on Nancy's question about the board adopting this plan. I think what we're asking you to do is to allow us to have the funding to refine this plan and see if we have a path forward with MDT, because that's the first question. But this needs to be vetted publicly. It has not been, as in the form that it's in now. It is built on a foundation that was a very public process that was done in 2016 with the Puma study. So I don't think we're asking you guys to say, yes, we love this plan, we want to do it. Regardless, we've got a lot of roadblocks out there that we have to navigate. So I think we're asking you to say that this concept is worthy of taking forward and determining whether or not, number one, it's feasible to do within an MDT right away. Is it publicly acceptable? And then how do we fund it?
My question, if I may, is does the $30,000 that we're asking to spend right now, does that get us to those points?
We think it does. Well, so I think that initially, when we had completed this study and had a center running concept that we thought was worthy of, and I think Ellen really nailed the sort of our thought process. It seems to be a very transformational and a concept that addresses a lot of the existing issues with the corridor right now. But we don't know whether it's really, how feasible is it? And so we know the things that we need to study to understand whether it's a feasible concept. But rather than undertaking a full study with all of those pieces, we know that there are probably two of the most fundamental issues that we need to understand are, will MDT, how accepting of this concept will they be, and can we get them to come to the table as an active partner? And we don't know that. We just don't know that. We've had representatives from MDT on the Midtown Mojo group, but we probably need to, in order to get full buy-in from MDT, probably need to go higher up in the agency. And we just haven't gone there yet. And the second issue is we need to really understand what the right-of-way impacts are, where they occur, and right now we can draw lines on paper, but we haven't done a really detailed survey, and so those lines might represent 10 feet. And so we don't know the full impact of that yet. So our strategy was to take this in bite-sized pieces and say, let's engage HDR to begin those conversations with MDT. And if it looks like, if we're getting to a place where MDT has, is buying, or I don't know how, well, MDT is becoming a full partner with us, then go the next step and start looking at some of those right-of-way issues in a more detailed manner. If those two issues can be resolved satisfactorily, then we feel like we can take another bite and start looking at more sort of detailed design and engineering, sort of the typical design and engineering that you would do on a project like this. The long-term goal, if we move forward with a concept like this, obviously that costs a lot of money, and we would be looking for federal grants or federal funding. And in order to be competitive for that, you have to know that it's going to work, and you need to have the engineering to a certain degree. But for us, we need to know that we have MDT as a full project partner before we go any further. So in answer to your question, is the $30,000 adequate? We believe that it is. A Mountain Line has also agreed to provide up to $30,000. So collectively, that would be a $60,000 retainer that we would engage HDR to begin this process. And that's based on HDR has put together a scope of services for some of these, initially had put together a scope of services for a full-blown feasibility study. And then we sort of cherry picked what items we felt we needed to get started with.
You, Ruth.
Yes, my question would be like what the time frame on this would be. When would you expect results from what we're asking them to do? I'm sure that was in the scope, but
I don't think I think, Tim, maybe I'll ask you to speak to that. I think some of that is going to be a little open-ended, particularly with MDT, because we don't know exactly, that's not quite such a definite time frame, but Tim, maybe I'll let you talk to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to the next step of having MDT, discussions with MDT and obviously they're a key stakeholder, and having the conversations to one, inform, bring them up to speed, both at the district level and at headquarters in Helena. And then to continue that collaboration to ideally become a vested stakeholder. It will take time to make sure we do it right, and we don't want to rush it. I would say that at the earliest, and Ellen or others feel free to chime in at any time, but at the earliest it would be 3 months to even have the first few conversations. And I think more are going to have to occur after that, which are likely planned for, or they are planned for with the scope that is in front of you on the agenda. My gut feeling is that within 6 months we're going to have some good abilities for meetings. The current situation, like us having the virtual meeting today, is something that's new to all of us as well. I think for something along these lines, in person is always better, but we want to also be making progress the best that we can. So not a definite answer to your question, but my gut feeling is that we have some pretty good progress made in 6 months.
No, that's okay. That's I wasn't asking for super specific, but then kind of following up on that, it's my understanding that that these two objectives are not being done concurrently, that you would not start on the right-of-way needs and impacts until you've got your meetings complete with MDT. Is that correct?
They could be concurrent if that's what Annette and others feel that is the right path forward. I think starting, at least initiating the conversations with MDT to make sure that where the temperatures are at before we initiate the right-of-ways is the right approach. And then we can gauge that and get started on the right-of-way. The right-of-way efforts will take less time than the outreach efforts will, for sure.
So this is Ellen. There's no question in my mind that we do not spend money on right away until we know we have a project, even if it's just a matter of surveying what we actually need, because MDT holds all the cards on this project. And as far as timing, one of the other issues is that none of the people who have been involved with this project through its evolution at the local level with MDT are there any longer. And so we've got a new cast of characters. We've got, maybe some of the people in Helena are the same, but they weren't sitting in the meetings and they weren't being kept apprised of how this project was evolving. So Shane Stack is no longer with MDT, and he was a key member of Midtown Mojo. And Ed Taves is no longer the district engineer or manager or whatever the terminology is. And he was receptive to this. So, we're starting from ground zero in some ways with MDT on this. So I think it's going to take a little longer. But there's no point in looking at right away if we're not going to be allowed to do this within the state's right away.
Anything else from anybody? Questions? Jill, if you would, we'll probably have a motion here in a minute. So
Yep. Can Annette stop sharing her screen? Thank you.
if you would
Let me
put up the numbers while we see if we have a motion, so that if we do, we can get stuff done quickly or more quickly.
Carl, I just had one question.
Yes, please, Tasha.
I guess it's two questions maybe. What type of formality is required to, or are you looking from the DOT in order to move to the next step of evaluating the right-of-ways? Do you just need informal assurances from them that they are going to be a vested partner, or do you need some sort of agreement in place? What does that process look like?
Let me jump in on that if I could. I think we need to have them at the table as a partner. We can't do this project without a large infusion of federal funding. We know that. We have capacity in Urban Renewal District 3 to provide a healthy match, which makes us more competitive. Every year that diminishes a little bit because the clock's running on that district, but we have a lot of capacity in that district right now. But we need MDT at the table with us along the way as we refine this. I mean, the way I look at where we are in process is kind of, if you look at how an architectural project proceeds, you've got schematic. Well, we've done schematic. You've got concept. This is kind of being refined to be that concept plan. It may get tweaked with public input or with some constraints that we don't know are out there. We've got to have MDT at the table with us, supporting this project and willing to say they will support it publicly and in writing when we go to the feds for funding. So I think that's an evolutionary process as well. Once we know we can secure federal funding and provide the matches that are needed, then I think we go into right straight through design, development, and construction documents and construction.
And the current funding request, does that include the commitments to go into to immediately proceed into the evaluation of the right-of-ways, or there'll be a subsequent request?
Tim, you or Annette need to respond to that. My understanding is that that gets us through right-of-way evaluation in some public process. 60,000, is that accurate?
It includes the MDT coordination and the right-of-way evaluation.
And then the next level of funding would be a part of a larger process of applying for and receiving the funding. Am I right about that?
Yeah, so there'd be other parts of the overall larger development of the feasibility and then next phases, which would be much more robust public outreach. And then, yeah, identifying funding opportunities and applying for those funding opportunities.
So Tasha, I think maybe what you're getting at is, would this funding be it before we apply for federal funding? And we likely will need more funding to do a more extensive feasibility study before we're ready to apply for federal funding. And we would certainly engage a consultant to put together that federal funding package. So this is really, but when we do, if we get past this initial funding, or I'm sorry, this initial step of, do we have a project? If we know that we, with a pretty certain degree of certainty, know that, so we've got MDT and we've got our right-of-way issues, we've got that in place, and we're pretty confident that this is a full steam ahead sort of project, as long as we get all the engineering done. Then we would go and fundraise. We know that we need to do a bigger feasibility study. We would fundraise with reach out to other groups in the way that we did to fund this initial study. So reach out maybe to the Midtown Association, reach out to some other partners, and not rely. I think MRA would be asked to contribute some to that greater feasibility study, but not to share the full burden.
Nancy, did you have, or Tasha, are you done? Okay. Nancy, did you have something?
Yes. Well, in consideration of Ellen's comments, I am not as, this is a little early to have the discussion, I think, on the capacity of the district, because we don't know, or I don't have enough information to know what that capacity is going to be, if it's going to be consistent with the capacity that the district has generated in the past, or what the pandemic effect on tax collections is going to be. So maybe there's some information that I'm not aware of. I appreciated Ruth's comments and I agree with her. I think that the subject of the Brooks Corridor needs to be addressed, and I'm in favor of doing it with this initial study. But I'm also think at some point as tax collections become more obvious and establish a trend, if there's going to be a trend, that we're going to need to look at all of the districts and be careful about what our position is for allocation of funds. I don't know, maybe Ellen has some information, current information that she can share with us, or Jill. But I think it's a little early to project the capacity of the district. That's all. Thank you.
Well, I think what we've seen, at least from Helena, is that that's sort of the way the state's operating right now. It's too early to predict what happens. So I don't know that the city has any greater capacity than the state in that particular matter. So my question to Nat, I think, maybe to Tim, is it so you do the adequate preparation, which I know you appreciate takes some time, and you make the pitch to MDT and they say, absolutely not. There's no way we would ever consider anything like this. Then what?
I think we, if then I think we have to sort of go back to the drawing boards. Yeah, I think we have to go back to the drawing boards unless we can, maybe we wait another 5 years and there's a sea change at MDT. I think that's why we believe that we need to take this in bite-sized pieces, and we know that MDT is the first bite of the apple.
I would point out that to date, when we have been, when the Midtown Mojo Group has been talking with the MDT, that they have not said no, they have said you have to address these concerns. And we have started to address those concerns. So I don't really anticipate, and absolutely not, I anticipate more of a process where it's like, can we do this and still address this concern? What do we need to change to address this concern to get to yes? That's the way I envision it happening.
And I think one ace in the hole that we have is the analysis that says if we do nothing, if we leave Brooks the way it is today, at some point it hits failure.
Okay.
I think that's some of what has come out of the work that HDR has done for us, and work that WGM Group has done earlier on, probably a decade ago.
Okay. Anything further before somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll make the motion. Ruth, did you want to?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I move that the MRA board approve the request for up to $30,000 in ERD3 TIF funds to partially fund a retainer for HDR to begin examining the feasibility of the Brooks Corridor TOD infrastructure study by 1, engaging MDT as a project partner, and 2, determining the right-of-way needs and impacts of the preferred center running BRT concept.
Ruth, are you going to second it?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay, Carl, do you want me to put up the public comment?
Yeah, let's do that. Although we did it before. Did we get any? No one. Has anyone called in or anything?
Nope. But since we just made a motion.
Yeah. Well, now we officially have a motion, and while we're waiting for public comment, does anybody have anything else to add? We'll give this a minute or so.
Carl?
Chris?
Just as an aside, as far as and I sent out a chat thing, I don't know if anybody got it. The downtown transfer center is configured the same way as the center you saw on Brooks there, the proposed center. where the buses cross over to kind of in a lane that looks like it's opposing the oncoming traffic, so that the doors open up on the proper side. It seems to work very well downtown. I've never seen it that there be any kind of a traffic or other kind of interaction problem. And I ride the buses quite a bit.
Yeah, except when some idiot drives their car through there the wrong way.
That can happen anytime.
There's also a four-way stop there on both ends, so.
Right.
That probably slows people down somewhat.
As someone who crosses that intersection on a regular basis, in theory, it does.
Well, there's a little over a minute since we officially asked for public comment. Jill, anything?
Nope, nobody in the waiting room. And that's been 2 minutes since you called for comment.
Okay, well, I think to make this so we're clear, well, all in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Annette. Thanks, Tim. Interesting presentation. And we'll look forward to hearing more as you proceed. The next item is the ERD 2 and 3 sidewalk project, MRL Crossing. Todd?
Yeah, thank you. I have a graphic here. Let me see if I can share that screen.
If it's the aerial photo, we have it.
Well, there we go. I think that brings it up.
God, we can see it.
Okay. I just see who's talking, but I'll go with that anyway. Last month, the board awarded the construction contract for the ERD 2 sidewalk project, and that was awarded to Shadow Asphalt. And part of that project includes improving the sidewalk crossing of the MRL tracks at 4th Street. And that crossing will consist of prefabricated cement panels that will be installed through the railroad bed. So MRL rules and regulations don't allow MRA's contractor to perform work in the railroad bed. MRL is agreeable to allowing us to improve the crossing at 4th Street, and we've come to an agreement with MRL, and the provisions of that agreement are that MRA will purchase the prefabricated cement railroad crossing panels and provide the funding to transport those panels to the construction site, and MRL will provide the labor to install the panels through the railroad bed. That work will occur outside of the Shadow Asphalt construction contract, and MRL has provided an estimate for purchasing those panels and transporting them, and that estimate is $5,741.25. And the staff recommendation to the board today is that the board move to authorize MRA to enter into agreement with Montana Rail Link for MRA to purchase and transport prefabricated cement railroad crossing panels in an amount not to exceed $5,741.25, with the understanding that MRL will supply the labor to install the cement panels at the 4th Street Railroad intersection, and also to authorize the MRA board chairman to sign the agreement.
Okay, questions? Joe, you want to put the numbers up there? Because I think we're going to have a motion here in a minute. Questions from the board in any way about this particular topic? If not, yes, Nancy. Nancy, you're muted.
Sorry, Todd, does this reduce the shadow asphalt project contract?
No, it does not. As far as cost, is that what you're asking?
Yep.
No, that's baked into the cost. We will, MRL has showed us where to stop our contract or our sidewalk construction work, and they'll pick it up at that point, go across the railroad tracks, and then we'll pick it up on the other side of the railroad track. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Is there a motion, please?
Well, all right, I'll move to authorize MRA to enter into an agreement with Montana Rail Link for the MRA to purchase and transport prefabricated cement railroad crossing panels in an amount not to exceed $5,741.25, with the understanding that MRL will supply the labor to install the cement panels at the South 4th Street Railroad Track intersection, and authorize the MRA board chairman to sign the agreement.
Second from someone?
Second.
Tasha, was that you?
Yes.
Okay. So public comment line open, and we'll see if anybody has public comment. And while we're doing that, Tasha, you may know this. Does the MRL's not wanting people to work in the right of way, is that them being particular, which I would understand, or is that a regulatory issue?
Both. I mean, I think that, it's all crossings are federally regulated by the FRA. And because of that, certain work rules and practices apply, and safety regulations that would not generally be known to local contractors. And so it is both a preference and a requirement, as far as I understand.
Okay. While we wait another minute for public comment, this comes to us because staff has and has long had a $5,000 limit on the amount of expenditures that it can approve. Ellen and I talked about this a little bit. That $5,000 limit was put in place a long time ago, and we can't do it today, but it might be a good time to think about whether or not we should raise that commensurate with, what $5,000 was whenever it was this limit was approved, to a number that represents that in today's money. And I guess while we're waiting for public comment, I guess I'd appreciate anybody on the board, or Ellen or Jill, the money person, comments on anything like that.
I guess my comment would be that there is likely some ordinances or rules in place relative to other city agencies. It might be good for us to know when we consider raising that amount. It seems like raising it to a higher amount is appropriate to me, but there might be an opportunity to reconcile that policy with any policies that are applicable to other city committees, agencies, or such.
That's a good thought. And then Ellen, were you able to figure out when the $5,000 limit was first put into effect?
Well, I talked with the office historian, Mr. Bean, about that. And it seems that when Jeff was here, there were limits that were even considerably higher than that relative to specific programs. We have not chased back when or where or how the $5,000 limitation came into play, just because we're scattered to the winds right now. But we can do that before the next board meeting. It doesn't seem that there's as simple an answer as I hope there might be, according to Chris.
We'll blame that on Chris. How's that?
I recall we did raise that limit temporarily at one point, I think in relation to
Park.
the old sawmill district.
It's the Silver Park.
Oh, Silver Park, yeah.
The $10,000 to approve change orders so we could keep going.
Because they were coming so quickly, and to wait for a board meeting would have just delayed things too much.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough site because of its past history and how it was used, and we knew we would keep running into surprises, and we did.
Joe, are we keeping anybody waiting?
No, Carl, nobody in the waiting room. No public
All
comment.
right.
Meeting.
Well, let's vote on the motion that's in front of us to approve the staff recommendation on the 4th Street MRL crossing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? If not, the motion passes unanimously. So we go to non-action items. Let's finish that discussion we started. I think what I've heard is that the boards, Ellen, the boards would certainly consider raising the $5,000 limit. I think Tasha's suggestion that we look at what other people, what other branches of city government are doing, as well as trying to figure out how long it's been in effect so we can bring that to current rate. What that $5,000 then would buy now would be important information for us to have, and we can put it on the action item agenda when we have that information, as well as anything else you think of, or anything else any board members thinks of between now and then. You can just call Ellen and tell her that let's talk about that. Okay, Chris?
Real quickly, just to summarize what Ellen and I's conversation a little bit more. There was not a limit from there was no day-to-day limits when Jeff was here. There were limits on certain programs. You could go up to $20,000 for the CRLP program and the fire code program without board approval. The $5,000 limit was something that came in when there was even that and that actually happened as Ellen came on. So the history of the $5,000 number is 12 or 13 years.
Okay.
17, 16.
Who's counting? All right. The other non-action item listed on the agenda is future virtual board meeting protocol. What the heck does that mean?
That's a Jill.
There was discussion at the staff meeting last week on how the Zoom meeting would run as far as public comment, because there can be a lot of public comment at the beginning of the meeting and people waiting for a long time. So city council has kind of made some adjustments to when they take public comment. And Ellen wanted the board to have an opportunity to discuss if they wanted to change any of their protocols as far as when general public comment is taken. So it's just on there in case you wanted to have any further discussion on that.
Well, it seems to me last time when we had one of these meetings and we had public comment, it worked well. And then I think the general public comment, we haven't had much of it lately. And when we did have some of it, it was usually pretty short. I don't see any great need to change anything.
We could have a rotating schedule of one of us doing a little dance while we wait 50 seconds for public comment to come forward.
Well, I think the chair and the vice chair together can designate someone to do that. And I can be assured that neither the chair nor the vice chair will be the person.
My kids have been dying for a role in today's meeting, so
there we go.
Want them to dance. Oh.
Okay. Well, I think we've exhausted that topic. Anything in the director's report that people, that either Ellen, you want to highlight, or questions from any of the board members?
I had a question. Yeah. I was just wondering if at a future board meeting, maybe even as early as next month, will we get a Hotel Fox update? I've been very curious on how that's going to unfold now.
Good question. And one I've been asked repeatedly by people.
We can ask. I'm not sure there's much. I don't know how anybody can answer the question right now.
Did we have a May or June deadline in something, Chris? I can't remember.
The next hard deadline is in November.
Okay.
We had a schedule that we'd set out that included some things that happened in June and July and August in terms of approvals, but it's not a hard deadline. He needs to start work by November. Well, that's not going to happen. So we do have some time for him to figure out what he's going to do with his employees as they start reopening, what's going to happen to the music and entertainment business and the hotel business in America, Montana, and in Missoula, and see if he's willing to, on any kind of a schedule, try to put everything back together again. I don't think that's an unfair question, but it's not one that we certainly can't push him right now, because right now he's just he's more open than he was a month ago, but still trying to figure out what life is going to be. There will be a time when he needs to make some decisions on whether we should extend that November deadline. The council would have to do that after an MRA board recommendation.
Yeah, and certainly Nick's interest in building the hotel was predicated on the performance venue, and I don't think there's anybody out there that can tell you what's going to happen in that world anytime soon.
And this may be the most obvious question of the day, but I presume he's just put everything on hold.
That's our understanding.
Well, since this is recorded, just saying our support is still there, and we look forward to the update when the time is right.
I think our greatest avenue of support is to give that development group time for things to stabilize, and be patient with them as they process through the ramifications of this, and be optimistic, but not too pushy.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Ruth.
Yeah. Assuming that we're done with that topic, I had a question for Ellen on the Scott Street redevelopment project, because when we approved that due diligence, it included that risk analysis, and I thought that there was going to be a presentation to the board or some kind of report. So when you say that the environmental review didn't turn up anything that was unexpected, could you clarify that? What was expected and what was found, and what are there going to be for more costs for that, or is that going to come out of Brownsfield, or what's happening there?
Basically, what we engaged WGM to do was to there have been so many different environmental efforts on that property over the decades that they went back and put everything together in kind of a package so that we know what all's out there, what all's been done. There was nothing that they found that hadn't already been discovered. As you might know, the westernmost 9 acres is still being worked on. The easternmost, almost 10 acres, already has a record of decision and has been cleaned up to residential standards. We can certainly have them make a presentation to the board, and I'm happy to do that at the next meeting. It's not going to be real interesting, but it was a due diligence thing that we needed to do just to make sure, that John Adams wasn't the only person looking at that. At this point, Huddig is on the hook to do all of that remediation, as I understand it, and nothing's changed with that.
Ruth, do you have more?
No, I'm not necessarily asking for a presentation. I guess I was more concerned about if there was going to be, if we were going to have to do some more remediation, or if we're just, at this point, we've confirmed everything that we thought was an existing condition, and we've confirmed it, and we're ready to move forward with the development as we talked about a couple months ago.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Along those same lines, does the purchase of the Sleepy Inn property change Scott Street at all?
No, they're two different districts and two different funding sources. I don't think it changes the need for redevelopment of those properties.
Okay.
And coincidentally, unfortunately, both of them are in our opportunity zone. So it opens up a lot of additional possibilities. So if there are no
both involve the idea that the city would, own the property and then market it to redevelopment. I wasn't sure if because of some sort of limited capacity issue, the city would be saying, well, now that we have Scott Street, we can, or now that we have Sleepy Inn, we are less interested in moving ahead on Scott Street.
We're not hearing that at all. In fact, I mean, one of the things that the Scott Street property does is it allows Public Works to consolidate their operations in a contiguous manner, which then opens up land adjacent to the cemetery that can also be redeveloped. And we seem to have an insatiable need for housing in this city.
Okay, anything else on the director's report?
Just one thing that's not on there. Nancy, I think, sent everybody on the board a link to the North Riverfront Parks and Trails plan. It's a great site. It's a whole series of videos. I think there are 10 or 11 of them. They're short, but they're really good. The graphics are good. You don't have to read 400 pages of stuff. You can just sit and watch a really well done video for each kind of segment or aspect of that proposal. And I would encourage you guys to go look at it. And if you have any comments, make them. And that's just at Missoula's downtownmasterplan.com. That takes you right directly to that link. And there's a survey there. So Dover Cole's once again done a masterful job, and what they've managed to do in the face of this pandemic is, I love it because I don't have to sit and read page after page after page of text like we had to do with the downtown master plan.
Okay, anything else from anybody? What about on the rainbow reports, budget reports? Joe, anything that you wanted to call to our attention or questions from any of the board members?
I just wanted, sorry, it's going to be loud in here. In order for me to be recorded on MCAT, I have to have the microphone on. I just wanted to report that the financial reports show the new projects that have been approved. And when you look down at the contingency for our District 2, you're going to see that number is now negative because of the purchase of the Sleepy Inn. And that is because we've looked at our cash and we realized that the timing of other projects in that district are such that they're going to be delayed and there'll be enough time for us to make that Sleepy Inn purchase. And that was all detailed in the meeting where that purchase was approved. I just wanted to put that on the record, that is why you're seeing that negative contingency number. I've also had discussions with Ellen as far as looking at next year's budget and how we approach that. And if at this point in time, we should approach it any differently than we have in the past. And I think right now our approach will be the same, and that is we will consider our revenue streams to be the same as this fiscal year until further information is provided that we should maybe looking at assuming a less percentage of tax increment receipts. Then we'll just go with what we've done in the past, and that is assume the same revenue amounts from prior fiscal year. I'm happy to answer any questions the board might have.
So, and I will mention also that one of the approved projects in District 2 is the Partnership Health Clinic at the food bank. And I saw in Missoula the other day that Missoula County has pulled their funding on that for this fiscal year because they can't meet the timelines because of what the pandemic has caused to have happen. So that project now that was planned to be done in FY20. It will absolutely not be done until FY21. And that's another $480-some thousand, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Anything else on the budget report?
Wait,
Yes.
you had a question because I was noticing that so many of them were still listed as ongoing, and at least some of them look to me like they're completed. And so I was wondering if some of those are going to be falling off before the end of the fiscal year, specifically like Wyoming Street. What's left to do on Wyoming Street?
Yeah, there are a number. We're working right now really hard to get everything closed out that is completed. Just
Okay.
the work is
Wyoming Street is done.
The funds just hadn't transferred as of the date of this report, I take it.
That's correct.
Well, yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Staff activity reports, anything on that? Okay. Ellen, or Jill, what's the city's plan in terms of, I mean, are we planning on next month being a virtual meeting, or is the city have other ideas that we are aware of?
Carl, I'll jump in on that. I think that what we're hearing from the administration and from the council is, by and large, that they would like to continue to do virtual meetings. I think with certain boards, like the MRA board, when you've got complicated or difficult discussions that need to take place, there are advantages to having people in the same room together. We'll have to figure out a way to do that with social distancing, and I think we can do that in the council chambers. Some of the other boards, I don't think that's as applicable to. So it's going to be up to us. If we want to have in-person meetings, or if we want to do some hybrid, where if there are people who don't feel comfortable coming into a public space yet. But we'll comply with the governor's and the health department's directives.
Okay.
Marty and I had a conversation yesterday. They're trying to set up multiple Zoom rooms, as she calls them. Our conference room may be one of those. Jack Reedy room may be one of those. Council chambers already is one of those. But yeah, I think it'll be dependent on subject matter and the comfort level of the board and the staff.
Well, two things I want to say before we close. First of all, I believe that everybody has the right to, if they're not comfortable, for us to make arrangements to deal with that. So I hope that if we do some sort of in-person thing, if anybody's uncomfortable with that, they're not the least bit shy of expressing that. I understand that. Secondly, I heard a night or two ago that I think it was Massachusetts that had lifted their stay-at-home order, and the governor's saying in response to that was not stay at home, but safer at home. So, and I think we're still operating under that. It's nice to see you all. Everybody looks good. And unless somebody has something else, if not, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.